Hello, I'm Robert Lomas. The 2022 Daniel Owen Festival will take place during the week starting the 17th of October 2022. Every Wednesday for the 7 weeks leading up to the start of the festival, I will issue an English translation podcast on YouTube of one of the 7 sermons that Daniel Owen wrote and delivered in Bethesda Chapel around 1877. These sermons give a wonderful insight into the religious influences which motivated Daniel Owen as a young man, and also gave him his first experience in writing and public speaking. In these sermons he explores the issues which encouraged him to enroll at Bala College to study to become a preacher, and also the doubts which drove him to abandon the course and eventually become a great novelist. I hope you enjoy my translations of Daniel's sermons, which are also available in book form in both Welsh and English. Sermon number 4, written and presented by Daniel Owen in April 1877. Hagar. And he takes as his text, "And she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me?" Genesis chapter 14, verse 13. Let's now move on to the sermon. These are the words that Hagar spake when the Lord met her at the well on the road to Shur. She was a maidservant to Abraham. Though little attention is given to Hagar in the Bible, it is undeniable that she would not have attained even that small place without her connection to the family of Abraham. Her fame was gained entirely through this connection, but Hagar is not the only one who gained fame in the shadow of another. The brief history we have about her in the Bible is extremely effective and suggestive, but it does not direct much honour on the name of the famous patriarch. I believe the Bible's depiction of Abraham's character would have been cleaner and less perplexing if it had not mentioned Hagar. But honesty is the hallmark of the Bible, in that it is honest when telling everyone's story, setting out the dark side as well as the light side of each character. It tells of the evil as well as the good, and Abraham's character has its dark side. Even his aspirations to be a faithful father were not without fault. His faithfulness, humility, and idealism are well known, but he also had some unwarranted twists. An important one, I believe, was his conduct towards Hagar. When Abraham trusted in God for guidance and wisdom, he became greater than himself. But when he trusted his own judgment, he was diminished in stature. As we are taught, corruption of the best is the worst form of contamination. But why do I say this about Abraham? Isn't it true of all of us? We do the least of us when we trust in God become a better person. But even the best of us, when trusting ourselves alone, becomes weak. So as Paul says, when I am weak, then I am strong. Hagar's story creates compassion for her rather than respect for Abraham. Although her behaviour was not always prudent or appropriate in her position as a maid, however, when she was in distress, yet we might have expected Abraham to exert more influence in her favour than he did. The story of how she left Abraham's house, especially her second forced departure, exposes all our primeval feelings about her plight by touching the gentler parts of our nature. Breaking old ties is always extremely painful. Leaving an ex-sweetheart, an old neighbour, or an old friend is never an easy thing. It's like moving out old furniture that needs to be replaced. It cannot be done without the crash of a cymbal at our loss, even if the object is damaged. Hagar had been with Abraham for at least 14 years. She must have expected that she would always remain with him, and especially after she bore him a son, Ishmael. But she was forced to leave his house. Thinking what she had been to him, his bowels must have fluttered, and his soul suffered a deep wrench when he closed his door on her. But his wife Sarah was determined that Hagar and her son should be sent away. and it would not have been right for Abraham to go against his wife's decision. Indeed, even God allowed him to obey her, though he did not command it. The Bible tells us that Abraham rose early in the morning. He probably didn't sleep well that night. And he took bread and a skin of water, gave it to Hagar, and laid it upon her shoulder. Yes, you heard correctly. He piled it on her shoulder. Why did he not give her a donkey to carry her load? He dumped all her worldly possessions on her shoulder, except for his 14-year-old son, who walked by her side. But Ishmael was more precious to her than Abraham, with all his great wealth. In her eyes, her son was worth everything. The outcasts soon found that the sun is hot in the Bathsheba desert, and walking in such heat tripled their thirst. What else could they do but drink some of the small store of water in the skin? And that, of course, continued to dwindle. They wandered for how long we are not told, but the diminishing store of water in the skin lasted for a while. We can be sure that Ishmael was given the last drop. Their search for water in that arid desert was in vain. Their bodies were weakening and their strength failing. Despair and death stared them in the face. But the hardship was crueler to the young and tender boy. Hagar had suffered hardship before and survived. Now she feared that Ishmael was about to give up his spirit. As a mother, she couldn't bear to watch her son die, but she couldn't bear to leave him either. Thousands of people have experienced this same feeling. She was unable to bear to watch the scene, yet unable to forsake it. She placed the boy under the shade of a tree and seated herself about a bowshot away from him. For as she said, I can't look on helpless while my boy is dying. So she sat nearby and lifted up her voice to tell God of her troubles. She was far enough away from Ishmael not to see his great pain and suffering, but not so far as to lose sight of him. For anyone with a sympathetic heart, it is a terrible experience to witness severe pain, yet have no way to soothe it. Hagar had no hope of deliverance. But God does not see like a man. He sees the end from the beginning, and he saw that the boy about to die under the tree would make a great nation. He saw the Arabs, Mohammed, and his forces all latent in the boy, while the eyes of his mother thought she saw Ishmael fighting his final battle with death. God did not intend him to die. He took pity on the boy's distress. God spoke directly to his mother and disclosed to her the sight of a hidden well close beside them. The convenience of man is the convenience of God. When he is invoked by his servant from any direction, that is the time that God will come into view. It is worth it for a man to fall upon the most dreadful situation if God comes to him in the end. Although Hagar was a slave, the fact that God spoke to her was nothing unusual. He had spoken to her before. Tired of her captivity and a mistress who oppressed her, she had fled from her owner some 14 years earlier. When she fled from her mistress's house, she was pregnant, but not yet a mother. What her feelings were at that time are difficult to guess, but your certainty that you hold an honoured place in the thoughts and affections of others is the oil that makes the wheels of society run smoothly. On the other hand, there is nothing so torturous to your mind than to feel that you are treated like a dumb oxen and nobody cares for you, no one loves you. When a man believes that there is no love in the world for him, it strongly suggests that he no longer has a place in this world. Let me give you an example. On a cold and icy evening years ago, a man was on his way to his home near London Bridge. On the bridge, he saw a young girl he recognised. She was looking down at the river, seeming to be sad and lost in thought. He approached her carefully and put his hand on her shoulder. "Margaret," he said, "what are you doing here?" "Oh," she said, "I was looking at the cold river and thinking I would throw myself into it. Then you came over and spoke my name. The people of London are much colder than that old river. I thought everyone had forgotten me, and no one knew my name any longer." Such feelings of loneliness and deprivation are terrible, and if neither God's nor man's voice are heard at that time, it is almost sure to end in self-destruction. We cannot understand Hagar's feelings unless we have been in the same circumstances. She was lost in the true meaning of the world. She felt she had no call on the love of any living being. In the midst of the wilderness, she saw wild creatures enjoying each other's society with fondness, but there was no one to whom she could tell her troubles, nor anyone to raise her spirits with a word of comfort. She was completely alone and did not know where to go. If she went back to Abraham's house, she faced the resentment of a hard-driving mistress and a ruthless master. She also felt the guilt of her conscience after her own misconduct, which had put her in a special condition and given her a son. As she sat near the hidden well on the road to shore, we cannot know if she entertained the intention of killing herself. But the Lord saw her and heard her utter the words, "Thou, O God, look upon me, for hast thou not said, do I not look here also after this one who looks at me?" I would suggest that it was the first time in her life that she realized the omnipresence of God. Without doubt, in her master's house, she had heard much talk about the God of Abraham, but she had not come face to face with this mighty God. What is strange about Hagar's words is that as she became aware of the presence of God, she showed no sign of terror or horror. She expressed his pleasant surprise and comfort at his presence. "Do I not here look after this one who is calling out to me?" God said to her. He was paying attention, even to a poor slave like Hagar. This shows us that no one is so poor or sinful that they cannot call down the attention of the infinite. You might feel you are abandoned in the wilderness, but you are never completely alone. God is with you always. Hagar was not the only one to discover that it is impossible for us ever to be completely alone. We can all come to know this sooner or later. We are often looking for the one who is looking for us and seeking the one who already has his hand upon us. The Athenians once erected an altar to a god who was universal, and at one time they lived, moved, and existed in that God, saying, "Where can I go from your spirit, and where can I flee from your awareness? If I climb to heaven, there you are. If I sink down into hell, behold, you are there for me. If I take on the wings of dawn and dwell in the extremities of the sea, there also wilt thou guide me and hold me in thy right hand. If I hide in the darkness, then the night will be light about me." He fills the heavens. He fills the world. He even fills the depths of hell. He fills eternity complete. God is infinite. He fills the otherwise destitute void. No single thought is more terrifying or more encouraging than this. Whatever sins we commit, the eye of the ever-present God sees our actions. But whatever difficulty we may encounter, whatever isolation we may feel, God is with us to help us. He is never far away from us all. In all our wanderings, God shields us. We all recognize this as a doctrine, but we seldom experience and feel its truth. And even more rarely do we experience the personal presence of God. Too often, our omnipresent God is a distant God. Hagar had undoubtedly been taught about the omnipresence and omnipotence of God, but this time she realized that he could speak to her personally. There are times in every man's life when he comes face to face with God. The story of Hagar is repeated over and again in the history of all mankind, and it is highly suggestive that on both these occasions in Hagar's history, when God spoke directly to her, she was lonely and in great distress. Without a doubt, she spent many happy years in Abraham's service, but she did not hear the voice of God speaking to her during those contented times. It was only when she lost her happy life and became a refugee in the wilderness, in solitude and great distress, that she heard the voice of God speak directly to her and call her by her name, saying, "Hagar, maid to Sarah." How true this is in everyone's story. How well it describes our relationship with loneliness. Every one of us feels God's presence more at night than during the day. because that is when we are at our most lonely. In the midst of a crowd of people, busy with our daily tasks, or in the company of friends, God is far from our mind. But as the day comes to an end, when our work is done, when the tumult and raging of the world is silenced, when friends leave and we return to our own hearth, there we find stillness and loneliness. When there is nothing to hear but the ticking of the old clock, how many times has divine inspiration spread its wings over us, and the wall between us and the other world thinned, so that we can feel the presence of the invisible? And how true this is about our relationship with distress or affliction. Have you noticed, when travelling on a train, that when the carriage is running at its fastest, the tired passenger usually falls asleep? This is when he is being carried forward with the greatest speed, without knowing where he is going. Eventually the train approaches a station, the steam is turned off, and the carriage begins to slow down until it finally stops at the platform. And as the carriage slows down, the sleeper starts to feel uneasy, sniffing and yawning, until as conversations restart, he wakes up, opens his eyes, inquires where he is, and recalls where he is going. How similar is this to a man living through the different circumstances of life? When his health is strong and vital, a man is lulled by the gentle pace. He sleeps in happiness, unaware of his Maker, who gives him every good thing. God does not come into his thoughts. But at any moment, the great hand of God can touch the mechanism of his salvation. Then the man awakens and inquires, where am I, and what am I facing? So it is with circumstances outside ourselves, over which we have no control. When our trade pays well, our circumstances are comfortable, good health brightens the faces of the family, and everything runs smoothly. Where is God then? He is far in the background, and we rarely think of him. But if a change takes place, and things are not as before, expenses grow to be more than receipts, and need and poverty begin to pay us visits. Not everything is right in the house. Someone looks depressed, has lost their sparkle, and is no longer full of the laughter of health. We worry. That person is preparing to leave us. Is it a dream? No, he is confined to bed. A pill bottle stands on his bedside table, and angelic ancestors call to him in their own language. Everyone walks silently up and down and talks quietly, lest the spirit that is about to take wing is disturbed. And at last the hour is nigh, the dreadful moment when the brave heart is unable to stay and has to escape like a bowshot towards heaven. Now the world is turned into a barren, arid wilderness, and everything seems like a nightmare. A crowd gathers at the door, and someone reads from the good book. It is a vision of desolate imagination, yet so true that it consumes all the resources of our soul. Where is God now, you ask? He is beside you, at your side. The call for ye that are ready falls on the ear like the bell of eternity. I am the resurrection and the life. Comes not from the book of the preacher or the priest, but straight from heaven. Jesus Christ, yesterday and today, the same forever, is intended for us personally. God is everywhere at that time. Wherever a man is, he must feel that he is beside God and that God is talking to him. Remember Hagar and how God found her in the wilderness. This may not be everyone's experience, but these words have sure meaning. Count in joy when you have fallen in various afflictions. Often it is grief that introduces a man to God's society and opens his ear to God's voice. God will take care to bring a man to these circumstances at some point in his life in one way or another. When a man feels that everything is pressing him from all directions, that he is in the middle of the desert without water, when he is unable to find anything strong enough to support him, that is when he extends his arms into the darkness to try to catch hold of something stronger than flesh and blood to support him. There is also something very suggestive in the question the Lord put to Hagar and in her answer. Hagar, Sarah's maid, where did you come from and where are you going? This question involves all her previous life and what still awaits her. It questions as much as she can see of her past and what she expects to lie before her. It is a massive question, and it is no wonder Hagar tried to answer only half of it. I am fleeing from my mistress Sarah, she said, but she didn't venture to guess where she was going. When she said, I know that I am a slave, it was as if to say, Sarah was my mistress, and I know that I did not leave honourably. I fled. She may also add in her heart, I know how sick and tired I was, but what awaits me I don't know. The future is unknown to me. O Hagar, you speak for us all. We all know something about our past. We can look back and say where we came from and what our character is, but tomorrow keeps all its secrets to itself. A veil is drawn over the face of that future that is continually retreating as we move towards it. We cannot gaze through that curtain or look over it to see what lies ahead. We have embarked on a long journey, and we do not know where, in some 80 years or so, the youngest of us will discover where our eternal home is to be. After that lifetime, after all our misery and trouble in this world, hardly anyone will remember that we have ever been here. The future knows nothing of us, as we will not be there when it comes. So the great question of our time is, where have you come from? To be or not to be? That is the question. We may be happy and comfortable today. It could be the best of times if we get it right. But where are you going is a different question. If it were possible for us to see where we were heading, that could ruin our present contentment. Such knowledge could complicate the whole course of our life. We should be thankful to God for concealing our future and not revealing it. God is too good and too gentle to uncover everything at once. He comes to us quietly and kindly asks us, where are you from? When God talks to a man, it is an important moment in his life, a crisis in his history. It was the turning point in Hagar's story when God spoke to her, and if she had not listened to him, who knows what the result would have been. But Hagar welcomed the voice of the Lord, saying, Thou, O God, looks on me, and I am astonished that one as big as you is taking notice of a poor slave like me. We hope God speaks to all of us through some measure or another, but few of us give him the welcoming reception that Hagar gave him. When he turns to talk to us, his aim is the same as when he spoke to Hagar, namely, to set us on the right track. God met Hagar to give her a promise. She feared she had come into the wilderness to die, but God said unto her, I will make thee as many in number as the stars of heaven. He took her to the wilderness to free her heart to speak. When God brings us into the wilderness, his purpose is to show us the folly of trusting in earthly treasure and to direct us to the lively, ever-flowing fountain of his Spirit. He crosses our paths so often and rushes to meet us, always with the intention of talking to us. If our ear is keen enough, we hear his speech in everything. He speaks many times and in many ways. He whispers his gentleness in the face of every beautiful flower, declares his goodness in the softness of a breeze. He speaks in passages of verse when we have no other poetry, and his objective is just to talk with us. Creation and providence were not a sufficient medium for him to speak to us, so he belittled himself, paying a great price for us, and took on human nature to gain greater sympathy, to express his will to us. He spake unto us through his Son in his earthly days. And as I have already said, when a man feels that God is speaking to him, that is an important time in his history. The second most important one, but a more important instance than when God speaks to a man, is when God stops talking to him. My spirit is not content with man forever, God says. If we refuse to listen to God, he will stop talking to us, and when he ceases to speak, so will his goodness towards us cease. Do not extinguish the spirit. That sermon was written and originally delivered by Daniel Owen. I'm Robert Lomas. Thank you for listening.